Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's program. Joining me in the studio today is director Joe Berlinger, whose latest documentary, Intent to Destroy, will start screening in theaters in Los Angeles and New York on Friday, November 10th. When we come back, my discussion with Joe. Welcome back, everyone. Joining me in the studio today is film director Joe Berlinger, whose latest, Intent to Destroy, looks at the Armenian genocide and its denial. It will be screened in Los Angeles and New York beginning on November 10th. Welcome, Joe, to our studio. It's
Thanks
an
for
honor.
having me. No, it's an honor to be here.
How did you get involved in this project?
Well, I've always been fascinated by the Armenian genocide. I'm not Armenian. I'm a Jewish guy from New York, but as such, I've always been, obsessed with the Holocaust. And as you dig deeper into the Holocaust, you learn about some of the connections to the Armenian genocide. And I've always, I've always been fascinated by the idea that it's somehow been, turned into contested history when, in fact, the historical record is so clear. But I never thought I would be able to make a film about it because many of my other films, normally I make films that are about stories that are in the present tense, that are unfolding, and I'm capturing the story as it's unfolding, and not somebody who normally makes those kind of Ken Burns style historical films. But when I heard The Promise, Terry George's big budget movie that is a love story set against the backdrop of the Armenian genocide, when I heard that that film was being made, I thought, okay, maybe there's an opportunity for me to make a film in the way that I'm comfortable, which is to follow a present tense story, the making of this film, and use that as a springboard to explore the history of the genocide. But more importantly, as a filmmaker, for me, what's more interesting than the genocide itself, which of course is very important, and I want to give people all of that information in this film, but what's more important to me as a filmmaker, what's a more interesting story, is the whole 100-year campaign of denial, the legacy of denial, the aftermath of denial, the pain it must cause the Armenian people to have their most painful chapter in history not be recognized by many countries, including the United States. And so by doing a film that embeds with the making of The Promise, it allowed me to do that because there's a history in Hollywood that this is taboo subject matter. And, anytime Hollywood has tried to make a film that's Armenian genocide themed, it usually ends with a call from the State Department saying, it would be better if you didn't do that project, because they get complaints from the Turkish government. As early as 1935, Irving Thalberg was making 40 Days of Musaada, and he was, in pre-production and convinced by the State Department to shut that production down. And so by embedding in now this historic film that was being made, it allowed me to tell not just the story of the history itself, but it also allowed me to talk about the denial efforts.
Were there similar obstacles you faced during the production of this film?
I flew pretty much under the radar, and so for me, there were no real obstacles, and I think same thing with The Promise. I think The Promise flew, for a big movie, flew under the radar. So there were no those kind of direct obstacles. And really, the State Department can't, The Promise was funded with independent money by Kirk Kerkorian. It wasn't a Hollywood studio, so you really can't, a government can't officially censor, but they can encourage for business and strategic reasons for a movie not to be done. That's been the history in Hollywood. Because this was an independently financed film, The Promise, I don't think that they were subject to those kinds of pressures. But no, we flew under the radar, and both The Promise came out, and now my documentary, Intent to Destroy, is coming out next week.
So having The Promise as the backdrop was very interesting because a lot of the viewers had already seen it and were familiar with the story. What were some of the things that you found out that you didn't know?
Well, I knew that there was an attempt to make this tragic history into a debate by Turkish interests and people who are aligned with that. And I should say, I know a lot of wonderful Turkish people, so I'm not sitting here and criticizing, individual Turkish people. I have many Turkish friends, but I think the government position that this never happened, I think needs to be rectified. And the degree to which this campaign of denial has been so successful and so well financed, I think, is the thing that I learned the most in making this film. And also by digging into the history, the history is so clear that this happened. I mean, it was the largest human rights story in its day. 145 articles in the New York Times in 1915 alone. The Near East relief effort, which was created to help Armenians in distress at the time, was the largest relief effort known to have, up to that point in human history, that was the most money ever raised for an effort. So it's also sad to me that Americans don't know this wonderful chapter in our own history. We were perhaps Armenia's greatest friend back in the day, and were quite generous in trying to help them escape the ravages of this genocide. And today, most Americans don't know what the Armenian genocide is, or if they do know about it, they know about it as this historical debate, and they don't know that actually it was a shining moment in our history where we tried to help the Armenians while the genocide was taking place.
I want to turn to the U.S. component of this story, and you chronicle it so well. You have the Woodrow Wilson element, you have footage and pictures from the Sèvres Treaty, and then all of a sudden the U.S. becomes kind of complicit in its denial. And it's critical because the Near East relief is part and parcel of our history here, and the number of people they've saved from the genocide. What do you attribute that to?
Well, in the Treaty of Sèvres, which laid out reparations and territorial aspirations of the Armenian nation, that was completely ignored and replaced with the Treaty of Lausanne. And, I think, sadly, Western powers all were looking for, towards the natural resources. The crumbling Ottoman Empire, the former holdings of the Ottoman Empire had tremendous oil resources. And, like so many issues, it's all about money. And I think people were going for, they wanted a positive relationship with Turkey and the modern Turkish state, and they wanted to go after those resources that used to be part of the Ottoman Empire, and Turkey could play a significant role in opening those doors. As the decades unfolded, as I'm sure your viewers know, then Turkey's strategic position as the bridge between Europe and the Middle East, that strategic position, became increasingly important as the Cold War escalated. So Turkey played a role strategically in allowing the U.S. to have, bases for listening posts, and then in more recent history, we used their territory for launching bombing raids into the Middle East. So I understand all that realpolitik intellectually. We don't want to offend somebody who's giving us, that kind of strategic abilities in other more pressing issues because they're more pressing because they're current. On the other hand, I don't believe there's any moral equivalency. We should not allow a genocide to go unrecognized because we want to use Air Force bases, in my opinion. I think it's not just America. I mean, as a Jewish American, I'm very disappointed that Israel also doesn't recognize the Armenian genocide. And, again, Israel is surrounded by a lot of unfriendly countries. Turkey is a friendly country towards Israel, relatively speaking. And so on the one hand, I understand it, but on the other, intellectually, but on the other hand, a country born out of the ashes of the Holocaust, I think has a special responsibility to recognize a fellow people's genocide.
We're going to continue our conversation after a short break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. I'm continuing my discussion with Joe Berlinger, the director of Intent to Destroy, which will be screened in theaters in Los Angeles and New York on Friday, November 10th. Go to the Pacific Cinemas at the Americana in Glendale and the Laemmle Theater in Pasadena, the Laemmle Playhouse in Pasadena here in Los Angeles. And where is it playing in New York?
At the Village East Cinemas in New York.
Okay, the Village East Cinemas in New York.
Not a lot of theaters are playing this movie, so that first week is critical. So anyone who has an interest in the subject, really, that first week, you know, the week of November 10th, should go out and support the movie so that it can be, they'll hold it over for another week or two or three.
While this is a subject that's very familiar with for the Armenian audience, I want to tell everyone watching that you should definitely go see it, because there's an interesting component that I found fascinating in the film, the archival footage.
Yeah.
Raphael Lemkin at the United Nations, the American official standing next to Ataturk, and there's so many of them.
Yeah.
Where did you dig all of that from?
Well, we dug very deeply to get some, you know, really good archival footage that really a lot of it hasn't been seen before, and also the quality of it is quite strong. You know, I have a wonderful archivist named Lizzie McGlynn who just dug deeply. She really believed in the cause and spent a lot of time looking around for material. So I think even though this subject is familiar to Armenians, I think this film really nicely kind of condenses the history, shows you things you may not have seen from an archival standpoint, but also really details the effort to make this look like it wasn't a genocide, which to me is the more interesting part of the film. I mean, the facts of the genocide are the facts, and there are, of course, many Americans who don't know the facts, so it's good that those are in the film, but much more of the film is about how denial works and what the impact of denial is on people.
What's the response you've been getting from the industry?
You know, it's played at quite a few film festivals, which has been nice. Some of my usual customers of my documentaries, and you know, your audience may not be aware, but you know, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm a pretty well-known documentary filmmaker who sold my films to, you know, many of the big names. A lot of the big names were kind of concerned about, you know, I kept hearing responses, well, we're a global company and we don't want to offend a country. And so I was a little disappointed, which is why we're doing this theatrical release now, and we really want to get the film out there. Ultimately, it will be on television next year and it'll have a digital release, but the critical response so far has been fantastic. We've gotten some really nice reviews, really nice invitations to film festivals. We've won about 5 awards. In fact, you witnessed last night, we won Best Documentary at the ARPA Film Festival, although as I jokingly said last night, it would be hard for a film that's about the Armenian genocide to not win a prize at an Armenian film festival. I would have been disappointed, but the critical response and the popular response has been strong. The industry response has been a little mixed, and I think some companies are afraid to take on the subject matter, sadly. You know?
Until even today, 100 years later.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
So where can we look for it to stream next year? Do you know any
well,
of the
it'll be on iTunes and a couple of other digital platforms, and eventually it will be on the Starz network.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. What did you think of the ARPA Festival? It was their 20th year.
Oh, it was a fantastic evening. It was such a, you know, I'm a veteran of many film festivals around the world, some much bigger, of course, than the ARPA Film Festival, but there was such heart and spirit and such an embrace of the filmmakers and the artists that, you know, you know, the sincerity and the warmth was really terrific.
Mm-hmm. What I liked about the film as well is that it kind of goes on your trajectory of addressing issues of justice and human rights.
Yes.
Your previous films I'm a fan of. I've seen. In fact, I binge watched a trilogy.
Oh, good.
So what's next?
Well, I'm actually about to shift gears a little bit. I'm about to go shoot a narrative film, a scripted film with Zac Efron and Lily Collins. So I'm going to try my hand at scripted movies. Mm-hmm. And then I also have a series coming out early next year called The Wrong Man, which is about wrongful convictions. And then also this 2 weeks from now, November 18th and 19th, I have a show on the Sundance Channel that's about the underlying crime. The show is called the Cold-Blooded, the Clutter Family Murders, and it's about the murder of the Clutter family in 1959. It was a home invasion. 4 members of a family were shot in the head with a shotgun. And that's the crime that caused Truman Capote to write the book
wow.
In Cold Blood, a book that I have revered for decades and deeply influenced me as a young person. And so this TV show, it's a 2-hour, two nights, 2 hours each, so a 4-hour special that dives deeply into that crime, into how Truman Capote wrote the book and what the impact of the book and the crime has been on American culture. And so that's on, that premieres in November 1819 on the Sundance Channel.
And certainly this film can have a long life in classrooms, in...
Oh yes, yes. There's a big educational component to this release, you know, Intent to Destroy. You know, we want the information to be out there for people, you know. It's not as contested. It shouldn't be as contested as it is. I mean, the facts are pretty clear. So.
Any final thoughts before
we
wrap?
Look, I made this film for the Armenian people. I had a lovely time in Armenia on several visits. You know, so I put it on to the Armenian people here in Glendale and in the area to support this film. I mean, it needs people to show up at the movie theater. You know, otherwise they'll just not continue to show it. So I hope people will support it.
Thank you for joining us.
Of course.
And all of you at home, remember November 10th, Friday, go and see the film. It's at the Pacific Theater at the Americana and the Playhouse, Lamley Playhouse in Pasadena. Make sure you fill those seats and you are going to be rewarded. It is an excellent film. Thank you, Joe, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And thank you all for joining us. Have a great evening.
Great.